In 1940, with almost all of Europe under the heel of Nazi Germany, the ambitions of the Axis powers didn't stop there. Their eyes turned southward, toward the rich colonial territories of Britain and France and Africa, viewed as strategic treasure troves. And from here, the North African Front was opened. On August 4th, 1940, Italian troops launched their campaign from Eritrea and Ethiopia, sweeping into British Somaliland. In just 2 weeks, the entire territory had fallen. But when the Italians shifted focus to North Africa, their luck quickly ran out. On September 13th, 200,000 Italian soldiers under General Rodolfo Graziani, backed by tanks and artillery, crossed from Libya into Egypt. Though the British had only 36,000 troops, they held the line, slowing the Italian advance and inflicting serious attrition. By year's end, Britain launched a counteroffensive, Operation Compass. On December 9, 1940, the attack began, fast, precise, and devastating. The result, from major Italian divisions were destroyed, 38,000 soldiers captured, while British losses were just 133 men. On January 22, 1941, the British captured Tobruk and advanced toward Tripolitania, Libya. Facing such a humiliating defeat, Hitler was forced to intervene. He dispatched one of his most gifted tactical commanders, Rommel, along with the newly formed Africa Corps to rescue his Italian allies. On February 16, 1941, Rommel arrived in Tripoli. Less than 2 months later, taking advantage of British overconfidence, he launched a rapid counteroffensive. By March 31st, Rommel led joint German-Italian forces in a series of bold attacks, driving the British out of Benghazi. On April 8th, Rommel struck again, capturing Derna, and by April 10th, he had surrounded Tobruk. By April 15th, he seized Umsat, right at Egypt's border. In just 2 weeks, the Axis had wiped out all previous British gains, pushing them back to the edge of Egypt. The defeat led to General Archibald Wavell being replaced by Claude Auchinleck. Meanwhile, Rommel's reputation soared across Europe. He earned the nickname the Desert Fox, and Hitler promoted him to Field Marshal. On June 22, 1941, the German-Soviet War broke out, forcing Berlin to divert resources to the Eastern Front. As a result, North Africa was left unsupported, while Britain bolstered its forces, forming the 8th Army with troops from Australia, New Zealand, India, South Africa, and Free France. They prepared a new offensive, Operation Crusader. On November 18, 1941, British forces launched their major assault around Tobruk. Rommel responded swiftly, deploying the 15th Panzer Division, destroying 1/3 of British tanks. However, when supplies ran dry, he was forced to retreat. On January 10, 1942, Rommel withdrew from Tobruk, falling back to Gila. By early 1942, Germany's navy had secured the Mediterranean, allowing fresh reinforcements and tanks to reach the Africa Corps. With renewed strength, Rommel struck back immediately. On January 21st, he launched an assault with 200 German, Italian tanks, forcing the British to evacuate Benghazi. By late May, Rommel attacked again, this time breaking through Gazala Line, 34.1. On June 13th, Free French forces were overwhelmed. And on June 21st, 1942, 35,000 British troops surrendered at Tobruk, as Axis forces seized a string of coastal cities. By the end of June 1942, Rommel's combined German, Italian forces had advanced to El Alamein, just 100 kilometers from the Nile Delta. But at this point, the Africa Corps was exhausted. Logistics broke down, supplies were stretched thin, and troops were fatigued. The offensive stalled at the doorstep of Egypt. By that time, the Eastern Front was becoming increasingly brutal, forcing Berlin to withdraw troops from North Africa. The British seized the opportunity, reinforcing their forces from across the colonies in preparation for a major counteroffensive. On August 4, 1942, Prime Minister Winston Churchill arrived in Cairo. He replaced General Auchinleck with Harold Alexander and appointed Bernard Montgomery as commander of the British 8th Army. At this point, British forces were overwhelmingly superior. 230,000 troops, 1,000 tanks, and 750 aircraft compared to 116,000 Axis troops and 540 tanks. On September 23rd, Rommel, exhausted, returned to Germany for medical leave, temporarily handing command to General George Stumm. Exactly 1 month later, on October 23, 1942, the Second Battle of El Alamein erupted. British artillery unleashed a storm of fire upon German defensive lines, marking the beginning of a decisive campaign. On October 24th, General Stumm died suddenly of a heart attack, throwing the German ranks into disarray. Rommel was urgently recalled and returned to the front overnight. Despite his efforts to reorganize the defense, British forces steadily broke through the lines. On November 2nd, British and New Zealand armored divisions broke to the northern front. By November 4th, Rommel was forced to order retreat, despite Hitler's command to hold at all costs. The British launched a sweeping pursuit. Fuca fell on November 5th, Tobruk was retaken on the 13th, and Benghazi on the 20th. Meanwhile, on November 8th, Allied forces launched Operation Torch, landing in North Africa and forcing Rommel to continue retreating. By January 23, 1943, Tripoli had fallen, and by mid-February, the remnants of German, Italian forces were confined to the Libya-Tunisia border. The Second Battle of El Alamein ended with 13,560 British casualties, while the Axis lost nearly 38,000 men. It was a decisive turning point, crushing Hitler's ambitions in North Africa and paving the way for the Allies' full-scale counteroffensive into Europe. Following their victory at El Alamein, the Allies had seized the initiative in North Africa. With Germany increasingly bogged down on the Eastern Front, the Allies were compelled to open a second front, and North Africa became the starting point. On November 8, 1942, Operation Torch was launched. From Gibraltar, over 500 transport ships and 350 escort vessels carried 100,000 British and American troops to 3 landing sites: Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers. The entire operation was commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower. At Algiers, landings went smoothly thanks to a secret agreement with local French forces. However, at Oran, U.S. troops faced fierce resistance. By November 9th, the situation was brought under control, and the very next day, Marshal Philippe Pétain's Vichy government ordered a ceasefire. The Allies quickly secured Morocco and Algeria, moving toward Tunis. But this delay cost them the chance to destroy Rommel's forces entirely. The German, Italian troops retreated into Tunisia, now caught between Allied pincers from east and west. Fearing the loss of all North Africa, Hitler and Mussolini rushed reinforcements from France and Sicily. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring was given command of all Axis forces in the region. By February 1943, Axis forces launched a fierce counterattack at Kasserine Pass, kicking off the final, brutal battles in the desert. From February 19th to 25th, at Kasserine Pass, Rommel's forces broke through U.S. Second Army lines, inflicting heavy losses on the Allies. The defeat forced Eisenhower to hand battlefield command to General George S. Patton. On February 23rd, Rommel was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Afrika Korps, but hope of victory had faded. Just weeks later, on March 9th, he returned to Germany. His desert campaign had come to an end. On March 20th, Montgomery's British forces launched a major offensive from the Libya-Tunisia border, forcing Axis troops northward. Then, on April 19th, British and American forces launched a final assault from the west and south. By May 7th, American troops had taken Bizerta, and British troops entered Tunis. The Allies gained full control over the Mediterranean and the airspace from Tunisia to Italy, collapsing Axis evacuation plans. On May 13, 1943, all German, Italian forces in North Africa surrendered. General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim and Marshal Giovanni Mess were captured, along with 240,000 Axis troops, more than the number lost at Stalingrad. On May 20th, a grand victory parade in Tunis celebrated the total Allied triumph in Africa, paving the way for the invasion of Sicily just 2 months later. On July 10, 1943, Operation Husky began, a massive amphibious and airborne assault by British and American forces on the island of Sicily. In preparation, American intelligence secretly collaborated with mafia boss Lucky Luciano. Using his vast network in Sicily, the Allies obtained coastal maps, port intel, and local support for the landings. Some mafia members even fought alongside U.S. troops against German and Italian forces. After 38 days of intense combat, the Allies cleared all Axis troops from Sicily. On August 17, 1943, the island fell completely, clearing the path for the invasion of mainland Italy. On September 3rd, Operation Baytown began. British forces crossed the Strait of Messina into southern Italy. Just 5 days later, on September 8, 1943, the Italian government announced an unconditional surrender. However, Germany quickly seized the rest of Italy, disarmed Italian troops, and continued the fight. On September 9, the U.S. launched Operation Avalanche, landing forces at Salerno, while the British attacked Taranto in Operation Slapstick. But the rugged mountainous terrain of Italy slowed the Allied advance significantly, while the Germans established a strong defensive line along the Gustav Line, centered around the strategic stronghold of Monte Cassino. From late 1943 to early 1944, multiple Allied offensives failed to break through. It wasn't until spring 1944, after a bloody battle at Monte Cassino, that the Gustav Line was finally breached. On June 4, 1944, Rome, the capital of Italy, was officially liberated. Just 2 days later, on June 6, 1944, the Allied D-Day landings in Normandy began, shifting the focus of the war decisively to the Western Front. From that point on, the campaign in Italy became secondary, yet the fighting remained long and grueling. By early 1945, German forces had fallen back to the Gothic Line, north of Rome, exhausted, starving, and outnumbered. On May 1st, 1945, General Heinrich von Weidenhoff ordered a ceasefire, and on May 2nd, all remaining German forces in Italy surrendered unconditionally. The Italian campaign came to an end, marking the collapse of Axis power in southern Europe. Although this front saw the fewest Allied casualties of any major theater in World War II, its strategic importance was immense. It opened up the Mediterranean, liberated southern Europe, and helped pave the way for final victory in Europe.